In these perilous times, see from current events how biblical prophecy is coming to pass in front of our eyes. You're watching In the Last Days, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. With Martin and Natalie Blackham, thank you to our friends and partners who make this program possible. Now, here's Martin and Natalie.
Hi, welcome to the In the Last Days television program. Great to have you with us. Last week, if you were watching, we had the privilege of having Eliezer ben Yehuda, the grandson of Eliezer ben Yehuda, the reviver of the Hebrew language. And great to have you again in the studio. Last week you were with Natalie, you were with myself this week, and you're here in Israel. And it's just great to have you in Jerusalem in the studio. Thank you for coming in today.
I love to be here. You know, it's in fact, I'm home. Some people ask me sometimes, you know, how can you, as the son of grandson of Eliezer ben Yehuda, live so far from Jerusalem? And I tell them, well, you know, it's very unfortunate, but I work abroad. I work in the United States. Sometimes I work in Europe. And unfortunately, when I get up in the morning and go to work, I have to go such a distance that I can't come back in the evening and relax in my home in Jerusalem. So of necessity, I find myself a place to sojourn in the place I am, and then as soon as my work is over, I rush back to Jerusalem to reconnect and to recharge my batteries. And then I'm ready to travel again and to speak abroad.
Now, your grandfather revived the Hebrew language. That was a miracle in itself. He was saying on the program last week about his he survived by miracle from tuberculosis.
That's correct.
And then he traveled here with his first wife.
Well, actually, he met her on the road. He was a student in Paris at the Sorbonne. And while he was there, actually even before he was there, when he was still a high school student in Russia, in Tsarist Russia, he had a vision. And this is not something that I invented or anybody else. Eliezer ben Yehuda wrote a partial biography. And in this partial biography, which he wrote in Hebrew, and which is available for all to read, it has been published, he said, he uses the word chazon, which is, for example, the word Jeremiah uses, chazon Yirmiyahu. You see, so this, Eliezer says, chazon chaziti, I have seen this vision. And then he says that he was transported. He saw, it started out, this vision started with a primordial light, a light that was greater than the noonday sun. And he was transported to the Ma'abrot HaYarden, the passage of the Jordan, where the children of Israel came into the promised land. And he said, and a voice rang in my ears, Tchiyat Yisrael be'artzo uvilshono, the rebirth, the resurrection of Israel in its land and in its language. And he says, that voice didn't let go of me from that point on. And I had no choice but to dedicate my life to fulfilling the words that I heard in my ear during that vision.
Now, this was before Herzl and the meetings.
Oh, this was a good 25 years before Herzl. This was a good 25 years before Herzl came to that realization that it is necessary to create a state of the Jews. And practically all the people that envisioned the rebirth of Israel did not have the complete vision as Eliezer ben Yehuda had. One of the interesting things is that we give him credit as the man who revived the Hebrew language, and it is correct that he did. That he actually, Hebrew language was not dead, and he did not recreate Hebrew, but it has been explained by some scholars that before Eliezer ben Yehuda, people learned Hebrew. After Eliezer ben Yehuda, people spoke Hebrew. That's the difference. So it was a language of learning. It was a language of academy. You see, people studied the Old Testament and other instruments that were written in the Hebrew language, but they did not speak. And Eliezer ben Yehuda took that learning which he had acquired before he went to the university. He was a student in a yeshiva, in a rabbinic school for many years, and really learned that rather than the studies that are done in regular school. He never studied mathematics, he never studied languages. This all came later. You see, in the beginning, he learned text, and he started learning it when he was 3 years old, on the knee of his father, who was a rabbi and a teacher, a Hasidic rabbi. You see, so he learned that, and only later did he come to learning what we call intelligence or academic knowledge, you see. And then he mastered that too. He had a photographic memory. And if he read a book once, he remembered. Not only did he remember everything in the book, but he remembered, for example, what page and what paragraph on that particular page was a certain statement, which was a great help to him when he wrote his Hebrew dictionary, because the Hebrew dictionary only has one dictionary that compares to him, which is the Oxford Dictionary of the English language, where not only do you have the explanation of what a word is, but also you have an example of where the word was used and how it was used. You have an actual citation, you see. And Eliezer ben Yehuda did that in his great dictionary with every word that has roots in ancient texts. And so he gives you the text, and he gives you the source. You know, you'll write Genesis chapter 6, verse 5. Now, when he was alive and he was working, he would prepare the text for print. He wrote it down and he went on to the next subject. After he died, the dictionary was finished. He finished all the words that he was going to put into that dictionary, and nobody dared put any more words into it. But only 6 out of the 17 volumes of the dictionary actually came into print. So the 11 volumes that were not printed had to be prepared for print. And so my father, my grandmother, his widow, Ben Yehuda's widow, was still alive, and she called on my father, who was a professor of agronomy. He was an expert on growing citrus fruit, oranges, grapefruits, and such, which were very great back then, you see. So he wanted to teach in a university agriculture. And my grandmother said to him, "Son, you have to come and you have to complete your father's work." And he said, "But Ma," and she said, "No, but Ma, you're going to do what I tell you." And being a good son, he did what she told him. She convinced Robert St. John, who was a stranger, to write a book for her. So you can imagine that she was very successful at convincing her son to come and work. But he didn't do it alone. He organized an editorial board. 5 people. My dad plus 5 people, academics, worked on the handwritten notes of Eliezer ben Yehuda, And because they were not sure that Eliezer ben Yehuda knew what he was doing, on every word they went back and searched the text, if it was really in Genesis 6, verse 5, or maybe it was in Exodus 6, verse 5, or maybe it was not in any of those books, but it was somewhere else in verse 19 in chapter 15 or something like that, you see. So they went and they searched one piece after another because they're signing their name on it. They're responsible. If there's a mistake in the first 6 volumes, so Eliezer is the fool, and he's dead, so he doesn't care. But if it's in the later books, they would be responsible. And it took them 35 years to finish the work.
Wow.
They didn't find one error. Everything was the way he had written it.
He wrote everything down on these...
He wrote it all on little pieces of paper.
Now, there was this funny story about the paper, because wasn't there the Turks were coming round one time, or they were going to come round, so didn't he have to, or his wife had to hide them?
Hide
all these
papers,
bits of
yes.
papers.
Yes, actually there's more than one story. The first story that is told has to do with the fire danger. Because my grandfather, was an absent-minded professor, so he would sit and he worked 18, 19 hours a day, so he was sometimes very tired, Now, luckily, he didn't smoke, so he wouldn't start a fire because he smoked. But, back in the early days, he worked by a candlelight. And the candle used to drip, and then at the end, the wick would fall, and it could have started a fire too. And he had piles of those papers, you see.
And each paper had...
Each paper was a little, like a what we call an index card.
Right.
You see, but it wasn't. It was really, like he would tear a sheet out of the calendar, you see, and he would use the back of it. And if he got a letter, he would tear it, cut it into 4 pieces, and he would use that. He used any paper he could have because he couldn't afford to buy fancy pieces of paper or cardboard, you see. So he had all these papers, and he kept them in piles. He tried to keep it in alphabetical files, but of course what happened is that they kind of spilled over. So eventually it was just a huge pile of papers, and eventually the editorial board had to go and separate them. Oh, this is an Aleph, and this is a Shin, and this is a Dalet, and et cetera, et cetera. And what happened was that one of his admirers was a fellow who came from Europe. His name was Jacob Chertok. Chertok was the name of the second prime minister of Israel, except he Hebraized it, and he called himself Sharet instead of Chertok. And he was the son of this man, Jacob. His name was Moshe Sharet, the son of Yaakov Chertok. And he came to visit Eliezer ben Yehuda. He was interested in the language. He learned Hebrew. And he came to visit Eliezer, and he saw piles of papers on his desk, and he saw the candle dripping. And he said, Ben Yehuda, one of these days, that ending wick will fall on a piece of paper and start a fire. And my grandfather mumbled, yeah, like Nero. He laughed while Rome burned, right? So, obviously, he was trying to make a joke out of something that was very serious. And about a month later, Mr. Chertok came back, and he brought with him 3 metal boxes. And he said, do me a favor, put all your handwritten notes in these boxes. And every time you finish working, take the piles off the desk, put them in here, and close it to prevent a fire. Now, there never was a fire, so maybe it was all for nothing. But maybe if there would have been those piles, it would have ended up with a fire. So one way or another,
so it's another miracle, really, that
indeed,
all these bits of paper survived down to your father.
And my dad, with my grandmother, the widow, they had to work on that. The widow, Chemda ben Yehuda, passed away at age 80 in 1951. And then there was only one little son left to finish the job. The job was not finished until 1958. In 1958, the 17th volume, the 17th and last volume of the Ben Yehuda dictionary came out. And after it was done, my dad was free to go back and teach agriculture. Unfortunately, by then he was more than 70 years old, and he thought that he might not be able to get a job in a agricultural school, and if he did, he wouldn't be able to bend down to look at the ground or put his hand up too much to pick some of the oranges off the tree. And besides, he'd been working in the Hebrew language for too long, so he decided to miniaturize. You know, it was the age of miniaturizing, and so he went and he created a little pocketbook dictionary, a Ben Yehuda pocketbook dictionary of the Hebrew and in English language. And it exists to this day. You can go and you purchase the Ben Yehuda pocket dictionary, and that was the work that my dad did after he completed the Ben Yehuda dictionary.
Now, your grandfather was also, may I say, involved in politics, because it was all, this whole area, I mean, even today, as we're sitting here, there's huge Middle East unrest and politics, so it's not changed. Yes. But he was there, and of course, he had the vision of people coming to live in Israel. But he had a fear, I believe, that people would be okay at the coast, that they would be happy to be, which is a bit what's happened.
Yes, actually, I know exactly what you're talking about. Eliezer ben Yehuda was considered the first pioneer. And so when other people had the idea, they often came to discuss their ideas with him and find out what he found out, and if he could give them the benefit of his experience, you know, so that they could do things possibly a little bit better. Of course, you know, people say that people have preset ideas and they never learn anything new, especially not from people that they don't consider to be great experts. And maybe if you're just a little expert, you know, they don't think anything of you. And so the first people who were organizing the arrival of immigrants in the land and preparing for them the basic necessities, such as real estate, such as professions to engage in, etc., they came to him and they said, give us the benefit of your experience, and he did. And they said to him, well, you know, we're buying lands near Jaffa, and we're going to start a city there called Tel Aviv, and we're going to go elsewhere, and we're going to start a place called Netanya, and we're going to do this here and this there, you know. And everything they wanted to do was indeed by the seashore. Why? Two reasons. First of all, it's much easier to live where the land is flat. You don't have to go and climb mountains. You know, when I was growing up in Jerusalem, we used to say that Jerusalem was laid out by a billy goat. You know, you go uphill and you go downhill, and you go uphill and you go downhill. And when you're young and you have to go up and down those hills, you could swear that it goes uphill both ways. There were just no downhills for some reason, you see. So it was a lot easier to plan, it was a lot easier to build, it was a lot easier to work the land where it was all flat. You see, you didn't have to create terraces, you didn't have to do all the things that you have to do where there's rocks. So what happened was that Eliezer ben Yehuda said to them, no, no, no. You have to understand that at any moment now, the other people that live in the land nameless people, will get the idea that we're going to develop the land and make it our land, and they're going to start fighting us, as indeed they did. He said, if we own the hilltops, we'll own the valley. But if they own the hilltops, we'll die in the valley. And they went, pish posh, this is nonsense, it will never happen. And so they built in the valleys, and other people built in the hills, and eventually they wanted to deny us the right to live in the valleys. Not a good thing to do.
Now, he saw Jerusalem as a key, really, didn't he?
Absolutely. He came to Jerusalem. You know, we're broadcasting to Great Britain.
And now we can be here.
And we're broadcasting to Great Britain, and in Great Britain they always called this country Palestine. This was never Palestine. The only people who called this country Palestine were people who wanted to deny the rights of the Jews to this land. This land was called Judea. And the Romans tried to change the Jews and didn't succeed. And the Jews revolted against them time and time again. Everybody knows about the great revolt of the year 70 when the temple was destroyed. But very few people know that a mere 50 years later, they started another revolution. And they bled the Romans, even though they had lost the last war, you see. So the Romans said, these Judeans are revolting. And they said, better forget about them. How can we forget about them? We'll change the name of the land. No more Judea, no more Jews, and we won't have that problem anymore. And so they went and they changed the name to the enemies of the Jews that used to live in the Gaza Strip. Even then it was a source of trouble to the world. And the people from the Gaza Strip, you know, are very famous because of that giant that lived there. And the name of the giant was Goliath, the Philistine. This name comes from the Hebrew word Polesh. They were Plishtim because they were Polesh. You know what Polesh means? It means invader. If there was ever a people that were not indigenous to the land, it's the Philistines. They were actually Greek people. We're not sure if they came from Greece or if they came from Crete or if they came from that famous, fabulous island that was called Atlantis that disappeared. But one way or another, they were not natives, Canaanites. The Israelites were Semitic people. They were like the Canaanites and like the Hittites and like the Jebusites and all the other people we read about in the Bible, except they were the people who carried the message of the Lord God, creator of heaven and earth, and therefore they were able to live in this land even after the other people were disinherited by the owner of the land, namely Lord God, creator of heaven and earth, you see. And so the Romans changed the story and made the owner into a nonentity and the invader into the owner of the land. And strangely enough, when the land was ruled from Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, what did they call this land? They didn't call it Philistine, and they didn't call it Palestine. They called it southern Syria. Because to them, this was the area right under Syria, southern Syria. They didn't recognize this as a special place of any sort. And that's what they called it. And then the Jews started coming back with my grandfather. Jews had always lived in this country. But now Jews are coming back to this land. My grandfather says we have to reclaim our nationhood. You see, we're being persecuted in the world because we're not a nation. Because we are kind of like a bone stuck in people's throat. In all the peoples of Europe, all the nations that have a few Jews, and they can't spit them out and they can't swallow them, and they don't like it. And so they don't like the Jews at best. And at worst, they want to annihilate them. Eliezer ben Yehuda said, let's come back to our land. He comes back here. He starts a newspaper. He starts teaching Hebrew. He starts speaking Hebrew. He does all these things for the purpose of having statehood. His goal is the fulfillment of that prophecy that he had heard. The return of the people to their land and to their language.
Thank you so much for coming into the studio today. We're out of time. And remember, we're living in the last days.
You've been watching In the Last Days, a TV program with Martin and Natalie Blackham, the program that looks at Israel and the end times with teaching from a Hebraic perspective. If you would like to financially support the program or find out about conferences, meetings, or ministry products, then please contact us with the details on your screen. Visit our easy-to-use website at www.inthelastdays.com and register for our free e-newsletter. Get the latest news from Israel, product information, online video teaching, or watch today's TV program at a time that's convenient to you. Thank you again, friends and partners, for making this program possible.
See you in 2 weeks, same time, same station, for the next program from In the Last Days.